Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum class. I welcome you to English grade 6 video lessons. I am your instructor Zia. I hope that you are doing well and you are enjoying learning new things every day. So as you know that we are dealing with our unit number 2 by the title Someone Who Understands. This will be our lecture number 5C with the competency of reading and critical thinking. Now let us read our students learning outcome or SLO. So our SLO is identify different point of views in stories or poems, draw conclusions, and make simple generalizations such as the moral of a story. So, my dear learners, while reading or writing, we come across a thing called perspective or the style of narrative or point of view. So we know that there are more than one point of view, one kind of narration, more than one point of view. So you can see them both in your stories and poems. We will understand that how we can identify between these point of views and also draw conclusions. And why do we draw conclusions? To get the moral of the story, for example, in like we did in this SLO. So this is a breakdown of our SLO. We need to understand different perspectives of stories or poems. Not only this, but we will also try to understand what are conclusions, how we can draw them to reach a conclusion like, let's say, a moral of a story. So this is what we are supposed to do. Now here is a vertical linkage of this SLO with the previous grade. These two are linked together. I hope that you remember it. Moving on with our brainstorming session for today, we have an interesting question for you. You are already familiar with it. What is the moral of story? My dear learners, we read stories and then we know that they have morals. How do we reach to the conclusion that what is the moral of a story? But now first let us see what is a moral. Think about it and then let's move forward with points of view. Now in order to view something, when we are reading something, we see that there are different point of views, right? So we will talk about the points of view, how different points of view shape a reader's perspective. So every kind of point of view is actually impacting on the reader's mind and reader's perspective. Now let's understand how it works. Now the first thing is the first person narration. In the first person narration, the story is told from the perspective of a character who refers to themselves as I. The narrator is directly involved in the events and experiences of the story. So now we saw that the pronoun here that is used is I. So first person narratives use pronouns like I, me, my, and we. When referring to a group, the narrator is a part of. So narrator is part of the story, and the character is, if the character is narrating the story, then we call it a first person narrative, and in that the pronouns are used like I, me, my, and we. So when we come across such text, such story with this kind of style of writing, we know that it is a first person's narration. Now let's look at the perspective and how it impacts the reader. First person narration allows readers to get inside the mind of the narrator, or who's narrating the story or who's telling the story, experiencing events and emotions directly from their point of view. It creates a personal and intimate connection between the reader and the character. For example, I walked through the dark forest, my heart pounding with fear. The trees seemed to close in around me and I could hear the eerie sounds of the night. Now, in this example, how do we know that what is the point of view of the story? This is the first person narrative because the character of the story is narrating it. The pronouns are used I and me and I again. So by seeing these 2 and 3 things, we can conclude that this is a first person narration or first person narrative. Now let's see in the second one. In another point of view is our third person narration or third person point of view. In third person narration, the story is told by an external narrator who is not a character in the story. They use pronouns like he, she, it, or they to refer to the characters. The pronouns that are used in third person narratives are he, she, it, they, or the characters' names also. So, what is the difference between first person narration and the third person narration? In third person narration, the person who is narrating it, which we call narrator, is not part of the story. He is not the character. He is referring to other characters, or he is generally narrating the story with pronouns that I have highlighted for you. So in this way, when we are coming across this kind of text, we can know that this is a third person narration. Now let's see how the perspective goes and how it is affecting the reader. So with our third person narration, it provides a more objective and distant perspective. It allows readers to see the story from an outsider's viewpoint, gaining insight into multiple characters' thoughts and emotions. What does this mean, my dear learners? This means that when you are reading something with pronouns that are in third person narratives, you feel distant and you can see the whole picture as a reader. Now, let's look at an example. Now, in the previous slide with first person narration, we read this example. Now we are reading the same example, the same sentence, but with a third person narrative. Let's read it together. Sarah walked through the dark forest, her heart pounding with fear. The trees seemed to close in around her, and she could hear the eerie sounds of the night. So now, with third person narration, you can see that the pronouns used are the name. If you're using the name, if you're reading the name of the character of this, when the story is being narrated, you can know that this is a third person's narrative. Also, we saw pronouns like her, she, her. So all these are pronouns for third person narrative. Hence, we come to the conclusion that this is a third person narrative, or the point of view is third person. Now, let's see how these both point of views, first person and the third person, are similar. Both first person and third person narrations tell a story, but they do so from different perspectives, different point of views. In both perspectives, the narrator may share the character's thoughts and feelings, but the way they do it differs. We can clearly see that the style, the way is very different in both these point of views. Both first person and third person narrations can be used effectively to create engaging and captivating storytelling. So, this is the difference. These are the similarities between these two narrations. They are different in telling their story. The style is different, but Each one has a different experience, and both of these narrations are important for the reader. Now, let's see how these two point of views, first person narrative or narration and the third person narrative or narration, how they are different. Now, first person narration provides a more personal and direct connection to the narrator's thoughts and experiences, while third person narration offers a broader view of the story from an external standpoint. This is the basic difference. In first person narration, the narrator's knowledge is limited to their own experiences, while third person narrators can access the thoughts and feelings of multiple characters. First person narration uses I and me pronouns, while third person narration uses he or she or it, or also the character's name. So, we have read a lot about the first person and the third person narrations. We can see that with first person narrations, you feel more involved. You feel like the character is telling you the story. And with third person narration, you feel a distance, and also you have a broader view of the story, and you can know the same amount of story about other characters and the same information about other characters. So this is the difference between these two. Now, exploring narrative perspectives, two stories, two points of views. Now let's see, what do we have. Now here we have a story with both a first person narrative and also a third person narrative. Let's read it together. The title is My Adventure at the Zoo, and the narrative point, the point of view, is first person narration. Let's read it. I was so excited when my parents told me when we were going to the zoo. As we walked through the gate, I could hardly contain my joy. The first thing we saw was the tall giraffes munching on leaves from the trees. Their long necks fascinated me. Next, we visited the monkeys. One cheeky monkey even waved at me. I giggled, feeling like we were becoming friends. We moved on to the lion enclosures, and my heart raced as I saw the majestic lions up close. They roared, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath me. It was an unforgettable day, and I can't wait to visit the zoo again soon. So here, how do you know that it is a first person narrative? Yes, you can look up at the pronouns that are used. All these are personal pronouns, and also you can see that the narrator who's telling us the story is actually a part of the story. He is a character. So that's how we know that it's a first person narration. Now let's read the same thing. I want you to read the same story with a different kind of narration, with the third person narration, and tell me that how, or tell your teacher that how this thing or this point of view is different than the first person narration. So let's read the first line together, and then you will read the rest of it by yourself. Sarah was filled with excitement as her parents announced their trip to the zoo. So here we can see that the name Sarah, we know that it's not a personal narration anymore. It is a third person narration because the name is mentioned by the narrator. Was filled with excitement as her parents announced their trip to the zoo. So this is how, my dear curious learners, you know that this is a third person narration because the pronouns used are third person pronouns, and also the character is not mentioning, the narrator is not mentioning him or herself, rather he or she is mentioning the name of the character. Hence we know that it's a third person narration. Now let's move on to drawing conclusions. Conclusions are the basic gist, the total idea that we have at the end of the text that we read. We conclude something out of it. Now, a conclusion is a decision that you make based on the information you have. And where do you get the information? This information comes from two places. It comes from your head, your thinking, your brain, and the story that you read. So these two things contribute in making you decide something or conclude something from the story that you read. Now, when you put these two things together, your head and the story, you can make a decision, draw a conclusion about what has occurred or about what is to come. Now, moving on, to draw a conclusion, you must do two things. Number one, use what you already know, your prior knowledge, your information, and use what you've learned from the story. These are the same 2 points. You can easily remember these now. These two things help you in draw a conclusion, and ultimately you can find the moral of the story. For example, here we have a puzzle for you. I am round, I am covered with sauce. Some people like to put meat and vegetables all over me. I am cut into separate slices for people to eat. What am I? Now, read this and reach to a conclusion and come up with the answer. Let's move forward from your book. This is your page number 16. Let's read this. I want that one. For how much are you selling this kitten? My dear learners, we are reading this chunk that was left in the previous lesson, in the previous lecture. We are continuing to read this. I want that one. For how much are you selling this kitten? I shall go home and ask my father for money, the little boy said, pointing to the smallest kitten. The farmer knelt at the boy's side and said, Son, you cannot get that kitten. He will never be able to run and play with you like these other cats would. After hearing the farmer, the little boy stepped back from the fence, reached down and began rolling up one leg of his trousers. In doing so, he revealed a steel brace running down on both sides of his leg, attaching itself to a specially made shoe. Looking back at the farmer, he said, You see, sir, I don't run too well myself, and he will need someone who understands. It was a delicate situation with tears in his eyes. The farmer reached down and picked up the little kitten. Holding it carefully, he handed it to the boy. The farmer knew that no one could love the little kitten like the boy would, although the farmer wanted to sell the kittens to the rich people. Since love and care are priceless, the boy was the best buyer for the kitten. How much? Asked the little boy. No charge, answered the farmer. There is no charge for love. Now, we have read this lesson thoroughly together. Also, let's read the remaining part. If we put ourselves in another person's shoe, we are often more sensitive to what that person is experiencing and are less likely to tease or bully them. Our religion, Islam, also tells us to be compassionate and gentle toward others. It also encourages us to treat animals with care, respect, and empathy because they are also part of Allah's creation and deserve to be treated with kindness. They cannot express their feelings and help themselves. Our Hazrat Muhammad ﷺ said, He who is not merciful to others will not be treated mercifully. So, we have a post-reading question for you. What conclusions do you draw from this story? So, after reading this lesson, the remaining part thoroughly, now you need to understand that how do you conclude the moral of the story. You can clearly sense the main idea by reading the story, and now you can conclude your message or your understanding of the moral of the story by that we learned in the previous slides, that to draw conclusions you need to first come up with your prior knowledge and your understanding from your head, and then read the story and get some information from the story. So by combining these two, you can find a moral of the story that we just read. Here is a simulation video for you to play for your better understanding about different point of views. Now let's look at the page number 17 from your book. We have a classroom activity to do. It's about reading and critical thinking. The question is, what do you feel when you see a child who can't find anyone to play with? And another question, number 4, is, how does the farmer's decision to give the smallest kitten to the little boy demonstrated kindness and empathy? So, after reading the story, you can easily answer these two critical questions. This is your worksheet for your practice, and now we have your homework. Read another story and draw a conclusion or moral lesson from it. Write it in your notebook with reference to the story. So this is your homework. You have already practiced it one time with me by reading the lesson and coming to the conclusion and reaching the moral lesson. Now, we are here at the end of our lesson with some resources. We have a worksheet, presentation, a lesson plan, a question bank, and last but not the least, a skill sheet. All these are here to help you in your understanding of the students' learning outcome that we just read. Thank you for listening. I hope that you had fully grasped the concept of different point of views and how it changes the perspective of the reader. Till the next video lesson, Allah Hafiz.